If we can have your attention, please, we'll call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the House and Senate Appropriations Subcommittees. We're going to go ahead and start. That's in case the Senate chair comes in. As usual, my members are well behaved. Representative Tanner, do you want to move to the front row? No, but it's past time to start. We'll wait just a minute or two on see if the Senate makes an appearance. Where is your chair? This is the first time that our subcommittee has met, and I would like to welcome our two new members to the House Subcommittee on Education Appropriations, Representative Tanner, Representative Lumsden. We're glad you are a part of our group. You have a lot to learn, and we're going to learn right along with you. We'd like to start on time, so we're going to go ahead and start, I guess. Good job. The purpose of this meeting is to hear from agencies in regard to the amended budget. We will have a separate set of meetings on the FY16 budget. So this discussion today will be strictly on the amended 15 budget. We'll go ahead and get started. The first agency up is Employees Retirement System. Executive Director, here he comes.
Good morning. My name is Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement System. As far as the amended FY15 budget, I note that there are no changes from the preliminary FY15 budget, so I don't have much in the way of comments from that perspective. Just thought I'd give you a very brief update on what's been going on with the system. As you're aware, we're responsible for the state's defined contribution programs and 5 defined benefit programs. 2 of those programs, the legislative and judicial retirement systems, continue with their funding percentage above 100%. The Georgia Military Pension Fund is much lower than that, but on a steady increase. It's a new fund, and so we're slowly building the assets over time in that fund. The public school employees retirement system saw a slight increase in its funding percentage for the first time in a number of years this past year. And the employees retirement system, while at 71%, that puts us at about the median for our peer group, and due to the strong investment returns that we've had for the past several years as we continue to recover from the so-called Great Recession, I expect that we'll see a slight improvement in the funding percentage for the ERS as well next year. And that, I'll be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Okay, are there questions from any of the members of the committee? Okay, Mr. Brooks, which one are you? Okay.
Okay. There it goes. On the employees' retirement system that we're talking about, we're in the blended program now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What percentage of the new, and it's been operating, what, 4 years?
About 5 years now.
What percentage of the employees are, you know, the 90 days they can come out or whatever, are staying now? What percentage would you say are keeping their 401k?
Of all of the what we call GSEPs
The
eligible,
new ones,
the GSEPs eligible employees, currently we have about 91% of them that are staying in the defined contribution plan. In recent months, that percentage has been higher, so we're on an overall uptrend. It's roughly 95% of our newest employees are staying in the program.
And the state matches how much of that?
State matches up to 3% of salary, assuming that the employee contributes at least 5% of their salary.
Thank you.
And you'll note that one change that we made was to bring in new employees at the 5% rate so that they could take advantage of that from the first day.
So retention is a lot better than we thought it'd be.
Yes, it is.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we are aware that there are a number of the agencies that don't have any changes in the FY15 amended budget, but this is an opportunity for them to get in front and give you an opportunity to ask questions, and they are going to use this opportunity, as the executive director did, to give some information. Would you like to say some comments before we move forward?
This is the only time I've ever seen the legislature be ahead of schedule. Carry on, Mr. Chairman.
That clock's wrong.
This one is.
Okay. Next up is TRS.
Good morning. Jeff Ezel, Executive Director of TRS. As my colleague, Mr. Potvin, indicated, same thing goes for TRS. We have no changes in the 2015 budget, so it's the same that you all approved last year. So with that, I'll just give just a little update on the system. We have currently 223,000 active members of TRS, and we have 109,000 retirees of TRS. Our payroll last year was $3.7 billion. We're on track on retirement payments this year to probably push the envelope to $4 billion, probably about 3.9. Our assets at the end of December were $66.7 billion. Last fiscal year, we had just over a 17% investment return on our assets. So far this fiscal year, we're running it right at 2% rate of return, but that also takes into consideration we've paid out $1.9 billion in benefits so far this year. So the economy is doing relatively well, you know, with us from a financial standpoint. And with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Questions for the director? I know several of us have a vested interest in your success.
And we definitely try to take care of y'all, just like we do everybody else.
Oh, I'm sorry. You actually do have a question here. You are on.
Yeah. Over here.
Sort of.
Sort of. I don't guess I am. Technical support. Okay. Okay, 2% return this year, but you said we had a 17% last year return?
Correct.
All right, my little mind don't understand this. If we paid out how many billion last year?
Right at 3.7 billion.
And we paid out 1.9, but you said that takes into account we paid out the 1.9 billion so far. It still doesn't jive in my mind why.
Well, let me back up. I said investment return. I should have phrased it, our increase in our assets is 2%. Okay. So I'm just saying, I meant to say that, and that, takes into consideration we've paid out the 1.9 in benefits. Thank you for correcting me on that. Okay.
Any other questions? We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Okay, next up is the Department of Education, Scott Austenson. There are some changes here. When you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. The K-12 education budget for the 15 amended governor's proposal starts on page 93. And I'll say initially, while there are some changes, there are not a lot of changes. So let me just summarize it firstly by saying, as you look at page 93, the change summary, you can see there are actually 4 changes. 2 of the changes are related in that they are a redirect. One of the changes, the other 2 changes are increases, one for growth in QBE, and the other is an increase for testing. And I'd like to then move to those programs that are affected as we get to them. The first is the redirect, and that is from Information Technology Services into the Technology Career Ed program. So let me address, if I will, firstly, the first step of that redirect, which is a reduction of the budget, and this is a one-time reduction for the amended, not to continue in 16. And that is $752,000 that will result from some of the cost savings and also, frankly, from some of the work that has been staged, but we're not going to be able to accomplish this year in the Technology Services budget, which will allow us to then move those funds into the Technology Career Program. If I may move then to the Information Technology Services, which is the Career Technology Career Ed, which is on page 98. That's the other side of the transaction, if you will. So there's a reduction in technology services, and it is being redistributed or put into another program in the K-12 budget. So net, there will be no reduction to the K-12 budget as it relates to these 2 transactions. The increase of $752,546 into the Technology Career Education Program will be used for industry certification. In particular, we're talking about technology industry certification. We have a specific contract, and this is the dollar amount for that contract, and that contract allows students to become certified, officially certified in Microsoft and other products. This is a program we've had in place for a number of years. So the dollar amount is very specific, the $752,000, and the specificity relates to the contract. It is a very, very important contract from our belief, and the State Board is very appreciative that the governor was able to find funds, albeit from another area of our budget. But it is a very useful, constructive contract. It allows students to become certified in technology. The certifications themselves come from Microsoft, which, as you may imagine, is very meaningful for those students who are going off to employment or even wanting to go to other colleges, even perhaps in other states. It is a very, very defined certification from an industry leader, and we and the State Board find it to be very effective. So we definitely appreciate that redistribution. If I then may move back to QBE, which starts on page 96. The increases in the QBE, particularly the $126 million, is related to FTE growth. So, of course, when we have more students, the formula, the QBE formula, generates a higher need or a higher formula need. This year, in the midterm, there were 22,905 additional FTEs or additional students. So the $126 million is related to the increase of just under 23,000 students. To put that in context, that's about a 1.33% growth, which is similar to the growth that we've had in past years. So this is fairly normal in terms of growth, just over 1%. The dollar amount of $126 million, again, is consistent with the QBE formula. So there's nothing different about these segments except that they are fully funded, meaning that there is no austerity reduction to the growth in QBE, and we haven't taken austerity against QBE growth in a number of years.
Scott,
Yes, sir.
let me interrupt you just a second. We have in the back a student from the Cyber Academy. They had me online asking questions for about an hour before we started this hearing. And one of the questions they asked, and trust me, they asked some really hard questions, was about the funding for the Cyber Academy and the fact that they were now the largest high school in the state, and they felt like they needed more money. And so I explained to them what you just got through talking about, the additional funds that come from every student as growth. But we welcome, let's see, this is Kevin who's back in the back. And these students did a wonderful job asking questions. I'm going to put those questions to the members of the committee later, see if you can give a better answer than I did on immigration and constitutional law and
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you, because Kevin, I'll manage expectations. I have not been certified as the CTAE program for students today, so if you ask me a technology question, I probably couldn't answer it. But I will tell you, for your particular school, of the 22,000 students, 22,905,000 students, of that number, 2,227 were from commission charter schools. Not all of them online, but of course that would include your school. So there are two sources of funding for your school. One of them is QBE. So a large part of the growth, relatively speaking, when you compare it to other schools, is actually from the commission charter schools. And so this is the line that's funding you for the QBE growth. And again, there's no reduction for austerity in these new segments. Secondly, there's another area which has not changed in the amended budget, and that is for your, what we call the commission charter supplement. So there is actually additional funding. I'm sorry, that is in here, but it's not in the 123. So if I may, that's a good segue. Thank you, Scott. Into the next line, which is the commission charter supplement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The $7,371,000 is intended to fund an additional amount of in the QBE program, but it's a sub-program. That's why it's not part of the $123 million. One of the sub-programs is for the commission charter supplement. That supplement, many of you will remember, was put in place by the governor. It may have even been Governor Perdue at the time, but it was related to the fact that the Supreme Court had changed some of the rulings around charter schools, the commission charter schools, which had already opened. And so the state is funding a portion of the what would have been local funds for you. The increase in students, so the growth, that 2,200 students growth increase, is reflected in the supplement in this line, which is number 2 on page 97 under the QBE program. There's another sub-program under QBE, not part of the standard QBE formula, if you will, is the charter system supplement. We had 9 new charter systems this year, and we've also updated for FTEs, and that pays an amount per student. And so the increase, midterm increase is $2.4 million, as you can see in line 3. Line 4 is a reduction that the reduction is related to less students in the Senate Bill 10. This is a scholarship program where parents are able to take special needs children and move them into private schools. And there was actually a reduction in the number of students vis-a-vis what we projected last January. And so that decline in dollar amount is related to a decline in students. It is not a programmatic change. The same can be said for the Move On When Ready program number 5, where there's a slight reduction. Again, it relates to slightly fewer students in the Move On When Ready program so it's a true up or adjustment of the correct amount from what we projected last January. If I may then turn to page 98, the testing program. The governor is recommending an enhancement of $2.4 million. Many of you recall discussions with the state board, and I know legislators have been very actively engaged in moving toward the Georgia Milestones test. Last year, the budget actually was enhanced by $8 million, but at the time of the enhancement, we didn't know what the cost of that contract would be. This year, of course, coming into the budget cycle, we know what the contract is, and so this $2.4 million reflects the increased cost of the Georgia Milestones test. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude subject to your questions.
Chairman Maxwell. You just don't want to ask a question?
You insist.
Yes, please, because Kevin's going to step in, and I don't want to have to answer anything about immigration.
I did have a question that I was going to catch you later, but since he's insisted, on page 97, I'll put forward this is the increase in the adjustment to the charter school system grants. What's the total? I couldn't find anywhere here the total that's going to be this year now. We're adding $2.3 million to that. We're reducing 1.7 for special needs and 35 from the Move On Committee. What's the total we're spending in that? Do you have that available, or you can give it to me later?
I do. From memory, it's just over, is it 61? What's the total amount, including this enhancement, please? Is it 65 now with this enhancement? It's approximately 65 million. And after the meeting, I have it in here.
Yeah,
I'll look it up, give it to you.
I'm just curious.
Yes, sir.
I didn't see it in the book. Thank you.
You're welcome. Chairman Coleman?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. On the technology, Scott, that y'all are talking about, when we did our tours of the state, we found that south of Macon, many of the systems did not have the bandwidth to even do their school reports. In hearing the report yesterday from the superintendent and you, with the money that we've allotted, will we now have adequate bandwidth all over the state so that all schools in this state can operate the technology?
The answer to that is yes, but when you say all, it makes me nervous because you're talking about technology. However, I will say this, and I will then address the funding, but I'll say in summary, we have put in place enough money to have all central offices receive 100 meg of bandwidth, which is going to be coming starting July 1st through the PeachNet system. So there's an assumption there that that's on track, and it is. Secondly, we've put money in through the Classroom Connections program. We put just over this fiscal year, we're putting about $35 million in bond funding. The allocations have already been provided to all of the school systems.
Okay.
Those budgets were turned in last week. So the information that we have from the schools is related to those budgets that were turned in. So what we are told is that we have provided the funds that are necessary for the school systems to have the 100 meg of bandwidth, which is per school, which is a tremendous increase from the 3 meg. Right. So servers, switches, and all those kinds of things had to be built up. So I'm certain that we are on track to have it into the central office. I'm certain that we are providing funds to allow all school systems to have 100 meg in each school. Now, will every single school be operational on July 1st? It's technology. So there is some build out in the last mile access, et cetera. I will also point out it's not in our budget, but you'll notice from the governor's transmittal letter, there is $35 million of additional funding that's going to be put into the DCA budget to be utilized in the Georgia 1 project. And Georgia 1 is something that Department of Education and GOSTA have been engaged with to ensure that we have classroom connectivity. So on top of the $36 million that have already been allocated in bonding, the local plans and budgets have been submitted to us. There's an additional $35 million. Okay. So with that amount of money, we believe that it is absolutely true that we will have classroom connectivity, but we will have connectivity of 100 meg to every single school. Right. The goal of the additional $35 million, I understand, in the DCA budget is to make sure that every classroom has connectivity. What we will be looking at in the next phase, which I would imagine would not be entirely at a state project, would be getting the devices themselves into the hands of the students. But to answer your question, according to our plan, and certainly based on the funding, especially with the $35 million that the governor is proposing for classroom connections in the DCA budget, we should absolutely have the resources to allow every school to have 100 meg.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask you something. RESAs, I noticed in the budget, of course, RESAs are very important, we found, especially to the smaller systems, maybe out of metro. It's critical. They cannot survive without them. And I notice there's not an increase, and I know we do budget, but what do you see in there for the RESAs for the future? I mean, what are we doing from the state level?
Well, firstly, from the amended budget perspective, there's no change in the RESAs. No reduction, but no enhancement.
Right.
Of course, they don't
That's
have
good.
student growth or those kinds of things. We work very closely with the RESAs, as you know, as a distributed network. There are 5 different sub-programs with the RESAs, and we work directly with the RESAs in each of those areas, functionally, if you will. The first, of course, is the mainline, the traditional, if you will, RESA grant that we provide, which is in the law and which is a formula. We also have sub-programs that relate to IT support, math support, science support, and we have PBIS, which is behavioral intervention support, which is a way of saying we have been funding specific projects within the RESA through the K-12 budget.
Okay.
And the State Board and the Department have been working very closely with the RESA. So while the RESA line itself provides a certain amount of money, we also, where we have flexibility, particularly with federal funds, say Title I, utilize the RESAs with federal contracts because they are a distributed network. So we try to manage and link all of the activities related to those priority areas. PBIS, as you may recall, is one of the areas that was funded in last year's budget.
Still see how critical they are and going to do everything you can to help these systems with it.
They absolutely are
Thank you.
critical.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chairman would like to ask a question first.
Scott, if you would provide me with the working papers with the computations for line items 2 and 3 on page 97, please. Just at your convenience.
Yes, sir. If I could just be clear, you mean the Charter School System Supplement and the Charter Systems Grant?
That's correct.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Tanner.
I wanted to just kind of follow up on what Chairman Coleman was asking. The Microsoft certification you mentioned and the other certifications that the $752,000 will pay for, I'm assuming that's statewide. Every school in the state who wants to participate in that, including charter schools, will they be able to under that contract amount?
Yes, sir. The contract I was talking about with Certiport provides for every single high school, public high school, of course including charter schools, with access to the certification at a reduced rate. It's less than, I believe, a fourth of what a normal cost would be. So for any school that has more than 25 students taking the test, the certification, and most schools do, this would be cost beneficial to them. Of course, because the state is providing it, it is extremely cost effective for the school districts. So to answer your question, it does cover all of the schools in the state. Now the contract, while it gives very preferential pricing, there is only a slight, there's only a slight escalation clause, which means we could probably increase 3 or 4 schools. It's to be soft negotiated. But if we had a large growth in the number of high schools, we would have to renegotiate the contract. Now, I hate to say this, but, because in the future, but the Department of Education in the CTAE budget, if necessary, if it's a slight increase, if we only have the usual 10 schools, it's $1,000 per school. I'm sure the State Board of Education would accommodate that. If we have, for whatever reason, an explosive growth in the number of schools, because this contract is based on the number of schools, not the number of students. If we had a large increase in the number of schools, then of course we would possibly have to renegotiate the contract. But Microsoft and the Certiport folks have been good to work with. We have a very good strategic relationship with them. The reason Georgia gets this preferential treatment is because we also have the Microsoft Academy, which is also part of CTAE, which is where the students are able to learn on the Microsoft platform, which is hosted by Microsoft, et cetera. So this 752,000 relates to the certification part, which is extremely important for the kids to have it. It is available to every high school in Georgia, including all charter schools, commission or non.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chair? Under the Georgia milestone testing, and this is something from yesterday that I heard said, and you may not be the appropriate person to answer it, but just asking a question. If it's my understanding, the math, high school math will be changed so that students will have some options. If the particular high school determines to go that way, they can take the traditional math or the new math that's being taught. And as a result of that, the testing that would be done according to the math they chose. So if they chose traditional math, the Georgia milestone test would be set up so they'd be tested that way. As a parent of 3 daughters still in public school, my question would be, what are we seeing the standardized testing like the SAT and others tests that my daughters will take to go to college to prepare them properly? Will we be doing that with the 2 different types of maths? And again, you may not.
Yes, I can certainly answer that, and I'm very familiar with what we're doing in testing because there are financial implications. So I'll answer a lot of those questions in one way, and I can maybe respond specifically if I haven't answered all of it. But to start, just to remind everybody that the first change in the milestone test that we were talking about, and this is what we started to fund last year, and that's what we're talking about needing to fund in this contract, is a change that makes the tests less multiple choice. It's a test that will include open-ended items. Now, from a cost perspective, that's expensive. Multiple choice tests are very cost efficient to score. They're scanned electronically. When questions are open-ended, it typically requires a human person to be paid to read them and score them. Now, the answers, there's a rubric, so there's consistency in the responses, but artificial intelligence is not where it needs to be to read some of the handwriting for some of our kids. If it's typed in, it's easier to read, and we're moving in that direction. So the first improvement in the tests that the state committed to starting last year in the milestones is to have open-ended. That open-ended is consistent with what the College Board and also the ACT provider have said is absolutely necessary for students to show that they actually know the material and, most importantly, can make connections. So don't just repeat what you memorized, but actually show that you know it. And that's where the SAT, the college folks, SAT, and also ACT have said we absolutely need to do that. We also know from the PSAT, which is also provided by the College Board, that many of our students have failed as it relates to what the College Board tells us is an indicator of career readiness, college or career readiness. And that's the PSAT. So it's not the full SAT. It's not just for college-bound students. It's the PSAT, which the state provides for every student, and I believe it's 10th grade. It may be 11th. Sometimes it's 10th, sometimes it's 11th. Point being, the College Board, to your question of SAT preparation, we know that Georgia students were not sufficiently prepared. The old tests, CRCT and the EOCT, had the lowest cut scores in the country, and they were all multiple choice. Simple tests that were not consistent with what College Board and others considered necessary for college and career ready. Not just career ready. That's why I point out the PSAT. And it was based on that information that the Governor and the General Assembly agreed that we needed to improve our testing. So the milestone tests will include more open-ended. It will still have a large portion that will be multiple choice, but there will be open-ended questions that will allow us to test students to make sure they actually know it. That is something that is necessary both for college and career, because a lot of our employers were saying, we're hiring these folks out of high school, they've got straight A's, but they can't think. They can't, unless I tell them exactly what to do, and they want to memorize it and walk in and do exactly what we told them. And so we need to work on helping students to move into career, even if it's post-college or even without college, be able to walk into a shop floor, listen to the instructions, read the directions, and think about it and connect the two. So that's the goal. The second thing that you referenced was the issue of offering a test for both discrete and integrated math. I will say that that change is above and beyond what we had talked about last year. There have always been discussions, and starting last year, about whether we needed to have discrete or integrated. One of the things that the governor ordered was for the state board to look at all of the curriculum. Part of that discussion with the curriculum included questions of TCSG, regents, teachers, parents, administrators, as to whether they thought we needed to have a discrete or an integrated math. Georgia's math was more integrated than discrete in the past, and we only offered one. Many of the districts said that they would prefer discrete. Unfortunately, a lot of our districts had already put considerable resource into integrated, and integrated among the education folks, and I'm talking college and regions, integrated was the preferred model. Discrete tends to be better for teachers and especially for textbook companies. It's easier to find resources, in fairness, for teachers. If you want to find a good textbook, you probably need to have the discrete model, traditional. If you want to have the best educational practice and you happen to have lots of resources, integrated is probably better. That's kind of the theme. So our point, the state board's point was, and the governor, which is funded in this budget and also next year's, was we want to offer the choice. That was the consistent message. We could not come to a decision that said we need to just throw everybody out of integrated if that's what they've already done and go to discrete. We want to offer choice. So the school systems will be able to pick which model they prefer, integrated or discrete. I will say this, regardless of which model they pick, all the students will receive the same instruction over the course of the 2 years. It's just that one, and we're talking algebra and geometry. Under the discrete model, you'll get all of your algebra in 9th grade, and you'll get all of your geometry in 10th grade. In the integrated model, you'll get most of your algebra and a little bit of your geometry in 9th grade, and then vice versa in 10th grade. But at the end of the sophomore year, at the end of the 10th grade year, all students will have received instruction on all of the standards. So we're really just talking timing. The reason that's expensive from a testing perspective is because we're offering 2 tests. But I would suggest, having worked on the costing out of this project, it's still much less expensive than having a test with a totally different set of standards. So the costs relate to offering 2 different tests and all of the security related to that, but we're not having to develop a lot of extra questions. There will be some redevelopment of what we currently have in our integrated models.
We have a couple more questions here. Senator Crane.
Mr. Chairman, Scott, let me say that the state of Georgia is blessed to have you. If we didn't notice, the quality of work you do for the state is exceptional. I appreciate it very much. You bring up a question on the milestones. What is the proposed frequency of that testing?
The milestones test itself, the testing frequency will be the same as it was with the CRCT and the EOCT. That is, it will be the test of record, and it will be provided at the end of the year. We are also trying to, and we do offer through the online accountability system, practice tests, if you will. We are encouraging districts, and many districts on their own are already working on what it's referred to as there's formative assessment. So the pre-test and the post-test. Pre-test to determine what do the students already know and what areas do I need to focus on. That's more pedagogy to help the teacher in the classroom. The milestones test, the frequency of testing will be the same as it was with the CRCT and the EOCT at the end of the year, same subjects.
Another question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Could you take me back to the QBE supplement? To understand that correctly, are you saying we missed our projections, or we don't build projections into our original 2015 budget? For the QBE
yes, Senator Crane, if you're referring to the QBE subprogram for the special needs scholarship, which would be page 97, line 4, and then also number 5, which is move on when ready. Every January, the governor proposes a budget, and of course the General Assembly considers it. And in that budget, we have to obviously project forward how many students are going to be participating in those programs next year. So when I say projection, what I mean is, by definition, we don't know how many students we're going to have next year. And so so here we are, for example, in January of 15, and when we take up the 16 budget, we're going to have to estimate how many students we're going to have next year. So when I say projected, I mean we're estimating how many students we're going to have. Then when we come, of course, into the midterm, we make an adjustment. In the Senate Bill 10 program, for the last 2 years, there's been a downward adjustment. If you go back to the history from 2008, in all the years prior to 2013, there were significant increases that were necessary in the midterm. So what this tells me is we clearly need to revisit our assumptions about how many students we will have in the next year. But when I say projection, it is frankly, we have a certain number of students now, and it is a projection as to how many we will have next year, and then we true it up, if you will, in the midterm. But with Senate Bill 10, even this midterm adjustment is partially inaccurate in that with Senate Bill 10, students have 4 opportunities to add, to take advantage of Senate Bill 10 or to leave Senate Bill 10. So even as of this midterm, we only are going to know the behavior of half the year. We still have 2 quarters where the numbers could change.
I guess that's a subset of the bigger question. On page 99, where we're looking at the supplemental $136 million for FTE funding, at that adjustment, you with me there? The
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I'm looking.
22,900 FTEs that
yes.
we're funding. Was that not in the original 15 budget? Because that represents the projected growth trajectory that you say has been fairly constant for the state of 1.4%.
Yes, Senator Cray. So I think you're referring to page 96, line 1, which is the midterm adjustment, and that's the $123 million. And that would be based on 22,905 students growing. That is what I would refer to as the QBE formula itself. If you look in Title 20, it's, as you know, written out in many words on many pages. That is the traditional QBE formula. The QBE formula always requires an adjustment in the midterm, always has. And so when we talk about growth in the midterm, and frankly, from what I've seen, usually the largest item in any midterm budget is QBE growth. And typically when folks say QBE growth, they're referring to the change in students, usually upward, in the midterm for the QBE formula. The other lines, Senate Bill 10 and Move On When Ready, are sub-programs. They are not part of what we would consider, I suppose, the mainline QBE. They happen to be in the QBE program, but they are sub-programs. The QBE itself does have a slight projection factor. Many of you know that it's a 3-part weighted count. The difference between October and March suggests a trend in the number of in the change in students. The 3rd part count of the QBE weighted formula, if you will, looks at that change and uses the change from October to March to try to project forward how many additional students they might have in the next year, actually how many students they might have up or down. That's not a perfect measure. So there's a slight projection factor in the 3-part weighted count, the 3rd part being the piece that relates to the projection. My experience, I'm sure most folks experience, my experience here 14 years, is that it's never exact, right? And you'd have to have no students leaving and no students coming into the state. On average, we've had about 1.25% growth over, say, the last 10 years. Of course, 2000, 2008, and 9 were anomalies where we had very little growth.
Okay, so just for me to be clear, you're telling me in the 2015 budget, as originally presented, we did provide for a projected growth of 1.25%.
No, I'm sorry, no, sir. What I'm saying is that the beginning 15 budget utilized the students that were in place last October, right, and used in its 3rd part weighted count a projection factor, whatever that was. That factor that projection was off, in this case by 22,905 students. So these 22,905 students were not included in the original budget for the beginning of the fiscal year 15 year, and that's because the projection factor we used from the prior year wasn't large enough. And I am not suggesting we need to change that projection factor, and I do know the governor is talking about looking at QBE, but this is actually one of the reasons I think that so many people are interested in looking at QBE, because it's a 3-part count, the 3rd part is weighted, etc. It's complicated.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more questions? Oh, that's right, you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, can you go back to broadband, because I'm a little confused. I see in DCA budget on page 67 where there's 35,000.
I may have gotten that wrong. It may have been in the 16 budget. Let me just look in the...
Because I see in the broadband internet through DCA for 35,000, and then there's a 20,000 line item for economic development projects. But is that for broadband as well, that 20,000 through DCA? I'm just trying to find the broadband in the education.
Yes, if we may. I'm sorry, I spoke. What I was referring to is the governor's transmittal letter. That's my word at the beginning of the budget, toward the bottom.
Okay.
I'm simply reading, and I'm not the expert on this, but I didn't mention it earlier because it was in DCA's budget, but it was a question, so I'm responding. In his letter, it says, the amended budget also includes an additional $35 million in grants for local schools to meet the demand for the Connections for Classrooms program.
Okay. So how much for the total broadband in addition to that? Because you mentioned $36 million in bonding. So what's the total that is for the broadband extension?
Well, ma'am, so again, I'm not totally privy to this. I do know the Connections program in Georgia 1, and I believe that DCA is transmitting those funds through Georgia 1, which is a way of saying DCA will place the funds in the most appropriate state agency in order to be provided to the school districts. That's $35 million on top of the bonding funds that went out that were already allocated, both by GOSA and the Department of Education, and I have
and that's the $36 million?
Well, I can tell you the exact amount. That was $36,744,000. Okay. And many of you may recall, $14 million was put into the DOE budget for this purpose for this year. $7 million was put into the DOE K-12 budget last year.
Okay.
What I'm referring to is the combination of, for this fiscal year, 15, the combination of what the Department of Education's funds were, which was the $14 million, plus what GOSA was able to utilize through transfer from DCA. So the combination, because we, the state board and the governor, we all look at it holistically. We don't care where the money comes from as long as it's well coordinated in one project, and that's where the Georgia 1 comes from. The Georgia Connections is the program term of trying to get students connected into the classroom, and so we're trying to get the 100 megs all the way down into the classroom. So again, to be clear, for this fiscal year, the bond funds combined, both GOSA, Governor's Office of Student Achievement, and ourselves, is $36,744,000.
Okay.
What's being referred to in the governor's transmittal letter, as I read it, would be an additional $35 million. And I know that, and this is one of the reasons I was hesitant to say that every single school classroom would be ready on July 1st. We're talking about school systems. We're talking about 180 school systems plus charter schools with a lot of variability in their technology, staffing, a lot of variability in that last mile access. I know that we understand the project to be on track, which means we will have 100 meg, not just to the central offices, but down to every school. Though I think they're referring to it as the fifth part would be to make sure that every single classroom is well connected. Many of the classrooms will be connected, and I'm sure that this was part of the intent of this $35 million is to work with that last piece to answer the question that was asked earlier, are all the schools going to be ready? With this $35 million available quickly, I suspect that we will absolutely be in a position, and DCA will manage it and manage it through Georgia 1, but we'll be in a position to make sure that all those schools are ready by the beginning of next year, and I'm certain that's why the other $35 million has been provided.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. We're a little ahead of schedule, but we're here and ready. The next agency up is the Department of Early Care and Learning. Commissioner Jacobs. Her first time to do this.
It is my first time, so go easy on me. Good morning. I'm Amy Jacobs, the Commissioner at the Department of Early Care and Learning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand this is your birthday, too.
It is my thanks, Sarah. I knew you would. And no
Happy
better
birthday.
way to share my birthdays with y'all. That's really what I wanted to do all along, so thank you.
We should have had cake here for you.
That would have been good. That would have been good. But thank you for the opportunity. As you know, the Department of Early Care and Learning is Georgia's birth through 5 early learning agency. And our most recognized and largest program is Georgia's pre-K program, which we are very proud of the history, but also the impact it's had on academic success, school readiness skills, and literacy and language skills for those 4-year-olds that participate in the program. In addition to our pre-K program, we also license around 5,500 child care centers, group daycare homes, and family daycare homes throughout the state, where we're working to ensure the health and safety of the children in those facilities. We also provide the child care subsidy through the CAPS program, which provides payment to low-income working families to help them pay for child care. And we administer the federal child and adult care food program and the summer food program, which provides meals for low-income children and adults throughout the school year and in the summer. We have no changes for the amended 2015 budget, but as you know, pre-K is lottery funded, so I just wanted to say thank you for your past support and hopefully your continued support. With your help, we've been able to restore the school year to 180 days, which has been an addition of 20 days, which has been a great thing for kids and for teachers because it does help their paycheck at the end of the day, and that's important to us, as well as the 1% we were able to deliver to them on your behalf this year for their salaries. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, you have one.
I promised I'd ask this question for a group yesterday when they were presenting on the salaries for your teachers. There's been a big concern, and some of the reps are concerned with their school systems. Is there still the difference between the salary of daycare paid teachers versus programs that are offered in the public schools? Is there still that salary difference?
No. It depends where you're located in the state, and it depends if you're a public or a private provider, but if you're a certified teacher, it is the same salary.
Regardless of where you are?
Yes, sir.
Regardless, that has been?
Yes, sir.
Maybe you can help, Mr. Chairman.
I think the concern that was raised yesterday was the difference in salary for a pre-K teacher in a school setting versus a teacher in kindergarten through...
Oh, yeah, kindergarten. That's still same different, too. That was my next
There is
question.
a difference between what a pre-K teacher makes in a public school and a kindergarten teacher, because during the HOPE and pre-K reform, we did discontinue the paying of training and experience. So there is a difference there. So pre-K teachers no longer receive training and experience.
That was the two questions. There was that difference used to, and then the difference in the pre-K and
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Tanner.
When we heard from the gentleman a few minutes ago, we talked about almost 23,000 new FTEs and K through 12. Has there been an increase in pre-K over the past year also?
We have been consistently funded for 84,000 slots, which equates to about 3,800 classrooms throughout the state, and that's been the same for the past 3 years. We fill about 81,000 of those slots. And I know that you probably heard the governor mention his Governor's Education Reform Commission, which we will be having a pre-K study group as well to really look at the formula and look at filling more of those slots so we can serve more of those 4-year-olds throughout Georgia. But it's remained at 84,000 for the past few years.
So we don't have a situation where we have people waiting to get in if they
We
want.
do have a wait list. The last number we saw was about 4,700. And when I came to DeKalb, that was a concern of mine. I think we will always have a wait list just because it would have to work out perfectly for there to be the exact number of classes where the children are. But I do think 4,700 is something that we need to look at, but I honestly think it's a capacity issue. We've got to find quality private and public providers, and when we talk to the public school systems, like for instance DeKalb County, we work closely with them. They just don't have that physical space to put more classes in. We could provide them with the funding, but they don't have the space. So during our pre-K study group, we will be looking at that and how we can address that and serve our 84,000 students.
You know, we've worked with parents to try to have these children in groups so that they all match up with the seats that are available. It just doesn't seem to work that way, though. Margaret?
Commissioner, I just had a question. We talked a little bit about this last year, and when we traveled the state with our study committee, we talked to a lot of the superintendents about this, where you have a whole class that can't be filled because you're lacking just a few students.
Right.
And one of the things, I don't know if you remember, Chairman Coleman, the superintendents talked a little bit about was there a way to, when you had districts that sit right next to one another, to share those, you know, where you may have two students, could they be pulled from another jurisdiction to create a class?
And we do try to do that as much as possible because we want to serve as many children and try to prevent closing classrooms. But it's also, it has to be a good relationship between those neighboring counties. So we try to foster that, and we're definitely going to continue to look at how we do that in our pre-K study committee.
Any more questions? Don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And hope you have a happy birthday.
Thank you.
Governor's Office of Student Achievement, Director Todd.
Good morning, Chairman Dixon, Chairman Tippins, Chairman Coleman, representatives and senators. The GOSA budget for amended 15 is found on page 109 in the governor's budget book. Our agency is charged with maintaining a statewide academic auditing program and publishing the annual state report card required for federal accountability. We also have several additional projects that include data and accountability reporting, primarily through the report cards and the Georgia Awards P20 longitudinal data system that we have developed for research purposes. Research auditing and evaluation piece of our work includes research reports that we publish, e-bulletins that we publish monthly, and other updates, including the evaluation of the Race to the Top project implementation in Georgia. We have a number of innovative programs, the Reading Mentor Program, the Governor's Honors Program, and the Innovation Fund. And we have also been working with digital learning. We staffed the Governor's Digital Learning Task Force in the previous year. And we have worked with the Department of Education and the One Georgia Authority this year to administer the Connections for Classrooms grant program. We're a fairly lean agency. We work closely to monitor our expenses, and we're always meet our budget expectations. Our annual operating budget this year is $10,666,250. The additional funds requested for the Governor's Honors Program and the Connections for Classroom program total $537,264 to bring that total up to a little bit over $10 million, to the $10,666,250 from the $10,128,000 that we started with. We have a staff today of 40 folks, including 2 or 3 interns. We will employ for the Summer Governor's Honors Program over 100 part-time employees that will work for approximately 4 weeks in the summer program there. The 2 items specifically that are in our amended budget request, $370,264. This recommendation reflects the addition of funds to increase safety and the academic rigor of the Governor's Honors Program. The Governor transferred this program to our agency in August of 2013, and we made the commitment to run the program as closely as possible last summer to the way it had been run for the past 50 years. So we worked closely with previous staff and with the DOE to obtain their records and files to maintain that program and to learn it the way it had been done. In that process, we learned some things that we feel are in urgent need of strengthening and improvement. 2 primary areas I would point out to you that these funds are requested to support. One is related to safety, primarily to support the improvement of the availability of health services and supervision of the administration of medications on the campus during the program, as well as to make available some clinical counselors to service some of the needs of the students that we learned about this year. The other enhancement would really be to the students' learning experience. Our faculty last summer were paid approximately $100 a day, which is about 57% of what a new graduate coming into teaching in Georgia makes a day. These are people at the top of their field, many of them college professors, and a few of them experts in their professional fields. We feel that we need to enhance that stipend just a little bit in order to attract the type of folks that we want teaching the most gifted students in Georgia during the summer program. We also learned during last summer's program that there was what I consider as an old principle to be way too much free time for 16-year-olds to have, especially when they're living in a residential program. So we are planning to strengthen the schedule. We will increase the academic offerings in terms of the time of day that they're actually in structured activities. And this funding that we're requesting will help us support the increased stipend and expanding the schedule. In this past year, just for your information, as we'll talk about more when we talk about the 16 budget, but we did engage in a one-year strategic planning process for the Governor's Honors Program. We engaged the Carl Vinson Institute of Government to work with us. We conducted focus groups with alumni and other stakeholders, faculty that have worked with the program in the past around the state, 5 or 6 different focus groups. We did a huge amount of research with the assistance of Carl Vinson into what the programs look like in other states. There are 22 or 23 other states that have similar programs. And we surveyed almost 3,000 alumni that registered on our website to find out the pieces of the program that were such strengths that we should not consider changing, but also to give some careful consideration to things that we should change and strengthen. We culminated this process with a steering committee retreat for 2 days at the end of the summer last year, and the reports from those processes are available on our website. The improvements that we are requesting funding for this year are things that we learned from experience, but that were also validated in that whole process of strategic planning and feedback gathering. The other line item in our additional funding request is $167,000. This recommendation reflects the addition of funds that will more fully meet the Tier 2 needs, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is, of the districts to be prepared to receive this 100 megabits per second of bandwidth this summer, actually by helping us to cover some of the administrative cost of administering the program. I heard you ask lots of questions about the Connections for Classroom program, so if you would allow me, I'll elaborate on that a little bit and tell you where we stand with that. Actually, our part in that program was to work with the One Georgia Authority. There was $25 million in their FY14 budget to address this build-out of appropriate bandwidth to the schools. They allocated $22.5 million to us to work with the DOE in collaboration with DOE and their bond funds, and Scott already alluded to the $7 million plus the $14 million that was added. We did a collaborative application process for the districts so that they could indicate to us all of their needs, where they are, what they think they need to build out, connections to the district office, from the district office to the school, from the school to the classroom, and then ideally we asked them to tell us what they would like to have in their classrooms. Even though we knew we weren't going to be able to fund that, we wanted to have a sense of where they wanted to go. We received applications from 146 LEAs. There were 143 school districts, 2 state charters, and 1 state school. The request for funds totaled more than $198 million. We were able to award to 103 of those applications. We did not fund anyone who scored less than 55 on the application or who asked only for Tier 3 funds. Those would be funds that would actually connect to the classroom, and I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. We are in the process of signing those contracts now and working with those districts to implement the purchases and the things that will be awarded based on those grants. We also fully funded the applications of 5 districts: Thomas County, Peach County, Tattnall County, Ben Hill, and Lawrence County. They were the top scorers in the application process, and they showed in their applications great vision for how to build out this process to the schools, to the classroom, and to the students, so we actually have the capability to fully utilize digital learning. And so we're going to work with those to develop some model districts that other districts can work with to see what is possible. The funding that was discussed earlier when you were asking Scott about the money in the budget, in the 16 budget, so I'll jump over to 16. The $30 million that's in there, $35 million, for the One Georgia Authority, or to DCH to go to One Georgia Authority, I'm assuming, would actually allow us to go back to these districts, look at the applications they've already made, and fund the E-rate match that was requested so that all of these districts will be able to build out to the classroom level based on their request on this original application. If we fund the E-rate match for these districts at $30 million, we will actually generate $110 million in federal monies. So we'll have a total of $140 million plus a few to spend on this project. And obviously, from what I told you, the original request was all those monies will be needed. Utilizing the E-rate funds does slow down the process. You know, it takes a long time to go through that. If you've ever dealt with E-rate, any of you that have worked in school districts, it's a very detailed and time-intensive process. It makes the IRS look easy sometimes. But we feel like it's worthwhile to do that in order to maximize the funds that will be available to the districts and be able to build out to the classrooms. There were also 40 districts that did not apply for this grant, and I think there were some questions about this earlier. We surveyed those LEAs to find out if they just didn't apply, why not? Was the application too complicated? Did they already have everything they needed? On the survey, 25 of those 40 districts responded. They all stated that they were already equipped to receive the bandwidth, and 19 of those said they're already prepared down to the school level. So depending on the availability of funding and the needs that have been relayed to us through that survey, we will also go back to those districts and circle up and see what needs they might have to be able to build out the access to the schools and to the classroom levels.
Are you confident at this point that at the start of the next school year, we will have bandwidth available to the school in all schools?
No. And the reason for that is the timeline on the E-rate process. They will all have the funding they need. They'll have the potential to do that, but it takes a while to work through all of the bidding procedures and the paperwork process that you have to do, and the timeline on the E-rate funding right now is very short. So it will probably be another year before it actually gets all the way to the schools, would be my estimate.
That's consistent with what I thought.
Any other questions that you have for me?
Any more questions? Oh, desk 5. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, thank you for what you're doing. I have a question about the stipend situation. Now, these people are teachers and professors that are already under contract with colleges or schools or whatever.
Yes, sir.
So they're going to, during their summer program, they're going to draw their regular checks, and we're just giving them additional stipend to come in and do the work in the Governor's Honors Program. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I can speak with more experience to the way it works in the school district. The teachers in the school districts that are coming to us from school districts are under contract for 12 months, which means their paychecks are paid out over 12 months, but they're not actually scheduled to work in the school buildings during that time. And we've been very careful about the 11 and 12-month employees to make sure we're not double paying somebody where they're already getting paid to work in a school district during that exact time frame. But yes, and then the college professors that we've been working with are not teaching courses during that time frame in the summer either.
But they could be doing that. Someone could work summer school or whatever. My question is, I guess,
oh, yes.
It's raising the stipend. What do you anticipate raising to? You said it's $100 a day now.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The stipend now you said was $100 a day?
What we paid them last summer, we paid, depending on their level of responsibility and experience, we paid between $3,100 and $3,500 for they were there approximately 35 days.
And you're looking to raise it to what?
$5,000. It still won't be enough, but it will make us a little more competitive.
Chairman Coleman?
Yes. Getting a lot of questions because of the charter systems, I-square, and the status quo. And I know you've been working very closely with some school systems and appreciate the conversations we've had. Could you please explain to us, if they're interested in charter systems, do they talk with you? If they're interested in all three, do they talk with you, or do they have different branches they go to, and who's giving the information, who's working with them?
Well, GOSA's official role, our agency's official role, is to work with the DOE to make recommendations about the performance improvement targets, and then to do the evaluation and data analysis on the back end and inform the state board about whether or not the schools have met those targets and make recommendations about consequences. We have been working very closely with the DOE on the whole process for the last probably 5 or 6 months to go through the revision of all the documents and the communication, make sure that the target setting process is something that we can maintain consistently. For the last 3 years, 5 years almost, there have been only 3 districts involved in the IE squared process. And so our interest was to make sure that we had a target setting process that could be consistent across many more districts. And we've worked with them to do that. So having done all of that work, I'll be glad to talk with anybody and direct them to the right documents, but the actual contracts are with the State Board of Education, and DOE has the all of the documentation and everything.
DOT then is
DOE
is doing it. Would you ask this question? If a system chooses status quo, now of course they can get flexibility with charter systems, flexibility with IE². Is it true that they go back to all the laws that are in place right now? They have zero flexibility, is that correct?
That's what the State Board has said. The State Board has said that if a school district submits a letter of intent, whether or not their contract is fully negotiated by the deadline, which I believe is June 30th, 2015. I believe that's right. If they have submitted a letter of intent or negotiated a contract for a charter system or an IE² district, then they will consider waiver requests for the upcoming school year from those districts. But the State Board has also said that they will not for districts that have not submitted those letters and by default have indicated that they're going to be status
So either
quo.
by default or choice, but they would revert back to lower class sizes, salary, expenditure control, and
all the expenditure
Okay,
controls,
thank you.
yep.
So that would not really be status quo, would it?
Sir?
That would not really be status quo.
No, sure would not.
That would be
Moving back.
step backwards, right? Okay. You have a
Thank you.
question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Todd, this is back to Governor's Honors, which is so dear to my heart. Didn't you say that not only is it a very low stipend that we're paying those teachers to leave their homes and teach in the summer, that also they would be teaching more classes?
They will be spending a little bit more time based on the schedule changes that we're proposing this summer. Yes, they will be spending a little bit more time in class. Technically, they're on duty 24/7 when they're there for those 30 to 35 hours, and they have been highly professional, very dedicated. They're always working with the students. So, yeah, we're really underpaying them, even at $5,000.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If you would, could you get us a breakdown of the $370,000? What it's going to be going to?
Yes, sir.
Just
I
get it
can
to
tell
us.
you right now, and I will get the document to you that has that printed out. The stipends for the increased set stipend amount and for the hours on duty would amount to $198,898. The increased availability of the medical care and supervision on campus would be $39,018. And the reorganization and strengthening of the academic program would be $132,348. And I will get the documents to your office that have that lined out.
Thank you. Anything else? Any members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee or discussion, House or Senate? If not, we will adjourn our meeting.